Hey everyone, Crisis here. After many years, we now have a new entry in the Arkhamverse, and for as controversial as it is, it did add some interesting new lore and powerful characters to the previously established gaming universe. So today, I'll be looking at the games themselves, hidden details, official guidebooks, and more, to present the most honest and accurate power ranking of the Arkhamverse cast, from weakest to strongest. As with all of my ranking videos, this will be broken into levels, with the standard being that characters within higher tiers would be able to overall defeat those below them at least 6 out of 10 times in a 1v1 no-holds brawl. With that said, let's begin this breakdown. Starting from the bottom, we find foes that never really offered a physical threat to the Dark Knight at any point of his career. The likes of Hush and Electrocutioner were done in by single strikes. Professor Pig only lasted as long due to his lack of pain receptors, and Scarecrow is no powerhouse by any means. Of course, if given the chance to infect someone with his fear toxin, either in liquid or aerosol form, it would take the utmost of willpower to resist its effects. However, ignoring the prep time he was allotted in Arkham Asylum to set up his traps, all it would take is either a ranged weapon or a competent enough grasp of martial arts to avoid his big Freddy Krueger gauntlet and just manhandle Crane. The first set of fighters to reach said benchmark would begin with people like Penguin and honestly the base form of the Joker. Cobblepot at least has somewhat strong weapons like assault rifles and grenade launchers, ignoring the one instance in which he sported freeze tech. Joker 2 usually sports handguns or acid weapons, and while being a surprisingly good hand-to-hand fighter, he just lacks the outright power to make much of a difference. He wanted a steroid even stronger than the Venom used by Bane just to be a match to Batman, with the guidebook and game itself showing that even that wasn't enough to beat an Asylum-era Caped Crusader. Bruce Wayne had cured himself of any Titan in his system, and while he did use his explosive gel to add an extra oomph to his punch, this KO'd Super Joker while Batman was totally fine, and even managed to stop a Two-Face robbery right after this. The sad fact is that we don't see much of her abilities throughout the Arkhamverse. She loses to a blinded Batman around the time of Arkham Origins, beats Two-Face after getting captured, and assists against Riddler's mech while aided by the Dark Knight. For me at least, it's just not enough to place her much higher. Into the next tier, we're starting to see foes that push the Caped Crusader at one time or another. Copperhead was one of the deadliest people on Earth, even at a time when the likes of the prior mentioned Catwoman were active, and nearly killed Origins Bruce via her poison, though she fell rather short when matched against Batman after he'd concocted a cure. Similar things could be said of Firefly and the, paler Deadshot. Both peak assassins compared to Copperhead, still dealt with by a comparably novice Batman compared to the prime he'd reached later on. Mr. Freeze managed to at first outdo the same Batman who beat the likes of Copperhead, Firefly, and Deadshot via his Sub-Zero blast, with the Dark Knight having to employ his heat-based extreme environment suit to put Freeze away. Batman also dealt with a more likely advanced Freeze years later during Arkham City, all while Joker's poisonous blood was taking a toll on him. He does have tech that is outside of Batman's league in terms of a head-on fight, however he was ultimately able to outmaneuver him and could in essence physically overpower him all the same, in spite of that statement. Clayface is hard to scale, seeing as he only appears once, with Batman kind of exploiting his weakness to ice almost like a Pokemon battle. However, based on his bio in Asylum, we do know that the likes of Batman and Dick Grayson's Robin beat the villain before. Considering the fact that Grayson acted as the Boy Wonder around the Origins era, I feel it's safe to generally place Carlo near foes dealt with by the same level of Caped Crusader. Keep in mind too that Batman would have been heavily fatigued by the time he beat Clayface at the end of City, being nearly crushed by rubble and having to be saved by Catwoman almost right prior. Batgirl, like Clayface, is kinda hard to place, seeing as we literally only see her in action during one DLC mission in Arkham Knight. That being said, both she and Tim Tim Drake Robin deal with the Joker with pretty much the same level of difficulty as Batman had in Origins, at least in hand-to-hand, so she should roughly match his level of competency towards the onset of his crime-fighting career. She is a super genius with total recall, having received training from Batman just before the events of Asylum, where he'd only grown more competent as a fighter since Origins, with the same being said for his level of armor and weapons, which Barbara would benefit from. Next up, we meet powerhouses who nearly outright bested Batman at one time or another. Lady Shiva pushed Wayne to his limits during Origins, testing herself just as much as she was testing him, with Batman managing to stalemate her while she had aid backing her up. Up until then, Batman thought she was the greatest fighter alive. However, many impressive fighters were those Bruce had yet to meet or assess. Even the Batcomputer's statement claiming her to be the best would only be taking into account Batman's knowledge up to that point. It's literally just his files in-universe that we're reading there, which makes Bronze Tiger that much more impressive, as he was just shy of beating the same Batman in the words of Amanda Waller in Arkham Origins Blackgate, which is canon per the official Arkham guidebook released after Arkham Knight. Bane himself, despite losing in Origins, managed to break Batman's back between the events of that game and Asylum. While this is a reference to the comics, the Arkhamverse is its own distinct timeline with many liberties taken, so all we know is that Bane managed to cripple Bruce after he'd evolved after their first fight. We do know that Bane gets access to stronger strains of Venom over time, after all. The tightened up version of Joker should be solidly above Bane, seeing as literal randoms using Venom could ragdoll the Luchador, as mentioned in the Arkham City stories and shown to us in the canon tie-in comic. Grundy, very similarly, could also bully Bane in the very same comics, with it being stated that he grows stronger every time he resurrects, so he's more powerful by the time of City than he was during Origins Blackgate. Poison Ivy, when amplified by Titan during Asylum, should boast the same level of, if not far more raw power as the likes of Super Joker, for instance, seeing as she was already a metahuman before being exposed to the steroid. It was stated that she could have destroyed the very small Arkham Island and wreak havoc across Gotham, which should be enough to imply she's the most outright powerful foe Batman has faced, at least in this form. All the same, the Dark Knight was able to fend her off, attack her weak points, and break her concentration, connecting her to her plants. Even when just harming a single tendril, Ivy felt excruciating pain, so it's safe to say that Batman more so exploited her empathy to plant life rather than having small island levels of power or anything like that. Regardless, if you lack the skill or toolkit exploited by Batman, Mother Nature likely has you beat. Ascending slightly, we start with the ultimate edgelord, Red Hood. Boasting a similar fighting style to Batman, a high-tech arsenal, and intimate knowledge of the Dark Knight, one might see his numerous impressive displays and be inclined to place him higher. However, there's context, as there usually is. The official Arkham guide implies that Batman knew the Arkham Knight was Jason the entire time, only trying to fool himself throughout the game to avoid the ramifications of his dead son coming back to haunt him. So at the very least, he's subconsciously holding back the entire time. When he can no longer ignore all the signs, and after being certainly fatigued after almost all of the events of Arkham Knight, he pretty much overpowers and bullies Jason, all while trying to talk him down and bring him back into the fold. Jason is also always conflicted to some extent, so to be fair, we can't exactly say what his peak is, yet I can only go with what we're shown. The most concrete scaling we have is within the Arkham Knight official novelization, where before their final battle, Jason tries to wear Bruce down, and it's stated that an exhausted Batman is still more skilled and stronger than Todd. This novel does contradict a fair amount of the game, with the same being said of the Arkham Knight comics, showing a totally different backstory for how Joker captured Jason, and Todd killing the same Bane who is alive per the actual source material here. Considering the novel, I'd place Jason around here, since Bruce was in his peak, per Jason's own words, and the fact that Batman was sporting his most advanced suit, which verbatim made him faster than ever, so even just being below a tired version of this Dark Knight still puts Jason above the bulk of the Rogues Gallery. Ra's al Ghul, on the other hand, managed to push an essentially Lazarus Pit amped City-era Batman to his limit. Again, Batman was getting more and more skilled as time went on, getting more durable armor and upgraded weapons. While Ra's did employ Scarecrow-esque mental powers here, he's still considered a rival to Batman without them. I also think it's fair to say a restored Arkham City Batman is probably overall a better fighter than a heavily fatigued Arkham Knight Batman, just to draw a better comparison between Ra's and Red Hood. At their peaks, yes, obviously Arkham Knight Batman would be superior, but he's severely nerfed compared to his amp in Arkham City when Ra's fought him, to make it more clear. In C tier, we begin to see those who outright equal Batman towards his prime, rather than simply rivaling but losing to him. Man-Bat was stated to be a physical equal to Arkham Knight Batman, meaning the bulk of this list, many of who are simply far weaker than less powerful versions of the Caped Crusader, would simply be outmatched by Man-Bat. Prometheus, while not literally appearing in the series, was still stated in his Asylum bio to equal Batman in physical and mental faculties. So despite Man-Bat being a little stronger, I hold Prometheus as just above regardless, seeing as he'd sport much of Man-Bat's power in addition to Wayne's intellect and skills. Azrael too was stated to have perfected Batman's techniques, at least up until he was deployed as of Arkham City, meaning he should match the Dark Knight at least at that time. Bruce also saw him as a potential successor, despite the fact that Tim's right there. We also don't know if Bruce one-shotting Azrael is the actual canon outcome, since the player can choose to just have Azrael leave peacefully, making it come into question who would actually win there. Otherwise, it does kind of prove that there is a massive gap between Arkham Knight Batman and Arkham City Batman, but again, we just don't really know for sure. And finally, here's what many of you are likely here for, the first pieces of Kill the Justice League scaling. Killer Croc, by the time he'd adapted to his torture and grown more feral and stronger by Arkham Knight, would be too powerful and deadly for most other characters to deal with. Even during Asylum, it's heavily implied that Bruce would just get one shot by Croc. It's scripted that you just have to avoid him and outsmart him, rather than actually just box with him as opposed to Bane, Ivy, or Titan Joker. Bats also needed Nightwing's help to put him away in Arkham Knight, and even while not at full strength, he was able to launch this peak Kill the Justice League Batman. Croc, likely stronger than he was in Arkham Knight, seeing as he evolved pretty much every time we meet him in the series, was stated to be able to give Batman a challenge. This all being in the official Suicide Squad prequel comic. The same Bruce with 5 years of advancements on top of Justice League training and tech, compared to Arkham Knight, which I'll explain more later. When it comes to the squad themselves, they are all pretty much right next to one another by the end of the game. They each receive the same amps in the form of Yellow Lantern power batteries to boost their equipment, LexCorp armor upgrades, and AI rewriting their brains to make them more effective, etc. There are certain things that could put particular members above the others, like Waller saying that King Shark could take on Superman, which, while generally very false, it at least enforces the idea that the demigod is the strongest squatty. Or Harley being the only one still conscious after a strike from a brainiac amped and, at the time, bloodlusted Batman, whereas the rest of the team were just KO'd. On that note, Harley's come a long way since Arkham Asylum, City, or even Knight. Even barring all the upgrades that I just mentioned, Quinn was already stated to rival the Joker as far as intellect and or cunning. Being insidious is generally defined as being like sneaky or crafty or able to exploit your goals through nefarious means, which is consistent and very applicable throughout Kill the Justice League. She could, for instance, sneak up on and KO Batman in the Arkham City comics. She fought off Nightwing long enough for Ivy to step in, and even force Batman into a situation where he was knocked out by her gun, captured, and needed Robin to save him. Trying to hold her back by her much less impressive displays in the past when talking about the new game is like trying to say Batman beating Bane in Asylum makes no sense because he lost to him at first in Origins. They just got better. Regardless, many statements call the squad the deadliest and strongest prisoners of Arkham, at a time when both Man-Bat and the Killer Croc reside in its walls. So, in a fight, especially with their upgrades, they should be able to 1v1 any previously mentioned character by themselves. Yet, it must be stated that despite many people moaning that the Justice League are undone by the much less impressive squad, The villains actually never overpowered any hero outright. Flash had his speed stolen by Toyman Tech, Lantern had his will compromised by the Batman-devised Yellow Lantern batteries, the Dark Knight himself has his fear toxin used against him, and Superman perishes against Luthor-constructed gold kryptonite. Even Brainiac, who has 12 other bodies and is holding back against the squad the entire time for plot reasons, or because he thinks they're interesting and wants to study them, decides to use the Flash's form to combat them and is hard countered the same way. This is put very bluntly when Luthor states that unless they use kryptonite against Superman, he'd just atomize them all. None of them, especially in a 1v1, are beating a single member of the Justice League in an actual outright fight. That's kind of the whole point of Luthor being there, someone who came up with the same ways of beating the League as Batman and can even hack Wayne Tech equipment. They probably only beat clones of the Justice League based on leaks, so no reason to go postal, I think. I'm not saying it's like perfect writing or like great, but the plot does make attempts to justify this, and that is reflected in the overall power scaling. With that said, similar to Harley, our bald boy, Tim Drake's been putting in the work. Even just months after the events of Arkham Knight, Barbara Gordon, a fighter trained by Batman with a perfect memory who monitored pretty much all of Batman's most intense missions, stated that Robin was beginning to move like Bruce after performing takedowns in his DLC chapter. So again, we can't really use any of his bad performances from earlier, seeing as he's just improving over time like Batman did himself. This would come to the point that it's just insane, as Batman himself says that Robin and Nightwing, with Oracle providing intel, could pretty much replicate everything that the squad did throughout the game. He mentions Jason, but he just says to get him if they can, not that he's necessary. Again, Batman himself thinks that with just Tim and Dick on the field, that they could use his countermeasures to not only beat an entire evil Justice League, but also an evil version of himself. This is in stark contrast to Tim saying he'd be powerless against a Joker Batman as seen in Arkham Knight, and while we see his bloody mask and Harley assumes that Batman killed Robin, we don't know the context of this fight, or if it even was a fight. Tim could have been caught off guard. He's definitely not dead. The same game has Wonder Woman turn into ash and float away. We could have seen Robin's body if we were really supposed to believe he was killed off. Either way, Drake's made some gains. In the same tier above Robin is Deathstroke the Terminator. Now I know what you're all thinking, but the official Arkham guidebooks gives old Solidus Snake here a way out of his embarrassing loss in Arkham Knight. Even as far back as Origins, we learn that Deathstroke lets his guard down when at a distance from the Dark Knight. For some reason. Is he dumb? Yeah, kind of. Anyway, he even says as much in Knight, with Batman not disagreeing. Despite that, during the canon Arkham City lockdown, Wilson required Batman to go all out and use his utmost resources to fight Slade off, with Jason upholding the Terminator as the toughest foe Batman had ever fought. A true equal to Bruce, even as of Knight, again discounting his weird character flaw. It's even stated in the guide that Deathstroke only lets his guard down against Batman specifically. It's probably just the guidebook writer coping, but again, it is official, for as dumb as it might sound. This is consistent with the fact that Slade is stated to be the #1 assassin to Deadshot's #2 status, with Slade all but being confirmed as playable in the new video game. I'm sure this placement will only get more affirmed. Here we have my boy Nightwing. In Arkham VR, developed directly by Rocksteady, Batman, completely lucid from within a Joker blood hallucination, states that Grayson is the best fighter that he's ever trained and can't even imagine that someone could take him out. We then learn that, within Batman's mind, the only person capable of doing this is the same Jokerized Dark Knight, which Tim Drake would go on to fear. Yet still, Grayson is capable of fighting him off, performing counters and landing strikes, all while clearly not wanting to fight his adopted father and trying to get away. Batman sees this all and finds it plausible enough to justify pretty much everything he does in Arkham Knight, inspiring his fear that a Batman unchained would be too much for Gotham, making him distance himself from his allies out of fear he'd get them hurt. This is all backed up by Batman in the Arkham Knight novel, stating that Dick is the best.
I forgot how well we work together.
I hadn't. I only work with the best.
Grayson managed to arrest Poison Ivy, one of the strongest Arkham villains, alone and put her into the Bloodhaven Police Department, as well as the fact that he pretty much was a perfect match for Bruce when combating the same superhuman Croc that scales to Batman directly as seen in the new prequel comic. Keep in mind again that a weaker Croc could one-shot Batman from Asylum, and Nightwing not only 1v1'd him back in the day, but he can also toss around a far stronger Croc. Before people got on Batman's case for losing to the Squad, they were calling out Big Dick over here for getting pressed by Harley and the Penguin. Yet still, Nightwing was totally ready to keep fighting Quinn before Ivy pulled him away. Need I remind you of when Harley managed to put Batman in a death trap, or the time she was able to sneak up and knock out Batman in the official tie-in comics, or all the other times when the villains managed to get Bruce dead to rights? Same goes for Penguin. People ignore the fact that Cobblepot also snuck up on Batman here too. He didn't notice him sneaking around until he outright hurt him. If it's a Nightwing L, then it's also a Batman L here. Both of them get put into pretty sticky situations by their impaired or mentally ill villains, but what matters is that they ultimately win in the end. No matter what you think of all that, Grayson is superior to Tim by a wide margin, which makes Batman's statement about the two of them taking on the Justice League and an evil Batman all the more impressive. A big point of Arkham Knight, like I said, was that Batman feared letting Joker take over since none of his friends or family would be able to stop him. Yet, 5 years later, after sharing tech and training with the League, Batman has total faith that his sons could beat the entire JLA. Just like how Batman got way more competent across his career, so too did his sons. Almost makes you think what would have happened in the VR fight if Nightwing was just as bloodlusted as Batman was there. And finally, the man himself, Batman, by the time of Kill the Justice League, would be nigh unstoppable. I have a video all about him up right now if you want to check that out, but to summarize, Rick Flag, a highly decorated Argus agent, calls him the most dangerous man on the planet. He squad wipes the entire squad at the start, brandishing tech to nullify all of their abilities. Even King Shark's demigod strength somehow. Brainiac, someone who has consumed the knowledge of multiple planets from across the multiverse, values Wayne's intellect and strategic thinking, and if not for Harley's foreshadowed Joker-level cunning, his Fear Toxin-empowered Demon Bat form would have beaten a squad amped by Hack, Yellow Lantern, and LexCorp tech. Only against 4 villains brandishing all of those means at that level, coordinated by a mind rivaling his own, was the Dark Knight just barely undone, by pure luck at that. Even after they beat Flash and Green Lantern, they're still intimidated by Batman's pure will and skill. His speed and durability are likely even amplified, seeing as the similarly Brainiac-amped Superman was able to totally no-sell being impaled by kryptonite. Imagine how much stronger Batman would be now using that comparison. With his genius and mind and countermeasures against his friends, I have no doubt that he'd circumvent the Justice League, but as far as who is outright more powerful, we'd have to consider the other members. The Flash is faster than Superman and could even possibly time travel through raw speed alone. Yet his actual power was no match for the Brainiac-enthralled Green Lantern, ultimately with the likes of Superman and Wonder Woman being a tier above them, as Diana was able to combat a Superman made stronger than ever via Brainiac modifying his genes. Despite this, Wonder Woman managed to gain the advantage at various points of their intense battle, and would have killed the Man of Steel if not for his amp, with Superman, even in his normal state, being called more powerful than Green Lantern, and just the strongest being to ever set foot on Earth. His speed is also arguably greater than Flash's, they're at least comparable. Superman not only flew into the sun and back in 4 seconds, resulting in massively faster than light speeds, as broken down in my last video, but he also tanks the city-destroying forces of a nuclear bomb, and stated himself that he could move the Earth with a punch alone. Our planet, even just by spinning, passively generates enough energy to nearly equal what it would take to destroy a planet, which makes sense since it's a planet. So in order for Superman to actually move the thing by any decent measure, he'd have to overpower that amount of force, which would make him a planet buster as far as attack potency and durability, at least when not weakened by kryptonite. He also infamously managed to turn the night sky into daytime by slamming onto the planet, somehow. Now, there are a few ways he could have done this, but it's safe to say that the energy required to do so would be nonetheless insane. If he just outright right, push the Earth to reverse its rotation relative to the Sun at such massive speeds, he'd have to exert enough force to level an entire solar system, which, seeing as that didn't happen, it's probably more likely that he just spun the Earth itself, rather than pushing it along its celestial movement to properly face the Sun. This yields a much more conservative near 76,000 yotatons of TNT, or enough power to destroy a dwarf star, which is a lot closer to the planet-level narrative that the game is trying to convey for Superman. Wonder Woman can fight this same Man of Steel, one more or less immune to green kryptonite, and Green Lantern compares his power directly to Superman, kind of ignoring Wonder Woman, which could imply he's actually stronger than her. And while losing, Flash still puts up a fight and shatters giant constructs formed by an amped and now evil John Stewart. Batman also has the same armor as Flash, but anyway. This is where most of the league scales to at this point. Massively faster than light, planet to star level fighters. Yet still, Brainiac is called the greatest threat to humankind ever known. And while he used kryptonite against Superman to beat him at first, possibly implying he couldn't just take him on, we do know he gets access to the powers of the heroes he'd enthrall. So he should be the single strongest being in the Arkhamverse for now. The Squad also don't really scale to him, since they were able to employ the same countermeasure used to weaken the Flash. He even just blatantly doesn't want the Squad dead. He wants to study and enthrall them, and has many backup bodies, meaning he probably doesn't even care if just one of them gets taken out. With all that said, Kill the Justice League will maybe be getting more content, so this hierarchy could very well change with the introduction of more characters and lore. Thanks so much for watching, and if you made it to the end, be sure to check out the rest of my power scaling, video game, and comic book content on my channel, and I'll see you all next time.